So I think first things, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, particularly for our panelists and those actually work on live streams. Before we begin the proceeding and on behalf of all those present, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Euro nation upon whose ancestral land our city camps now stand. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, acknowledge them as the traditional custody or the knowledge of this land. The session now will be recorded. We will record audio screen share and our presenter. We will not be recording any video input or audio from you. Welcome all for our participant panelists. My name is Xunpeng Shi. You probably also know me as Rock Shi. I'm the research principal at the Australia-China Relations Institute of the University of Technology, Sydney, as well as the president for the International Society for Energy Transition Studies. Today, we are very pleased to join my former colleague from National University of Singapore, Energy Study Institute, Li Xiayao, and we together three institutes, UTS ACRI, ISETS, and ESI Energy Study Institute to organize this particular events. We call it Ninth Energy Transition Forum. That's from ISETS perspective. ISETS is a international society we have been working on, established in the past. This is our 4th year. We now have close to 600 registered members from 50 countries. We also have some prominent people serve as a council chairman, who is the former Secretary General for International Energy Forum. And we also have, to be announced, we have a Deputy Prime Minister from Thailand to assume the chairman role for the advisory council, which we will announce probably in a week or so times. The societies create a kind of platform to share knowledge and facilitate dialogue among different kind of stakeholders. And with that, you're probably not surprised to see we are working on energy transitions and other issues. And for ACRI, which is the only institute in Australia, probably in the world, to focus on the bilateral relationship. We are not China Study Center. We don't do history study art and other things. We are focused on contemporary relationship between the two countries. And Energy Study Institute for National University of Singapore is one of the leading energy think tank in the world. I'm very pleased to see a few colleagues here. Today, our topic, particularly, we're looking about the clean energy technology supply chain. One of the reasons probably for us working in the energy sector, we wouldn't be surprised to see why this issue has been highlighted. Well, one of the problem nowadays is geopolitical competition become one of the highlights issue in the international politicals, and that's not just a political factor or something far away from our energy community. And through the discussion early days on the supply chain on solar PV and anti-dumping, all those stories, which are very familiar from trade perspective, we already experienced, and that was created some trouble or from energy perspective. And now with the emergence of new technology, we see a lot of critical minerals as an essential input to clean technology. That create another challenges, and people are now talking about the supply security for critical mineral. And there is a tendency talking about we should form a particular supply chain to avoid this country or that country. But personally, as an energy research, I see one of the problem for those kind of things that first, there is some over politicized critical mineral supply chain, because unlike oil and petrol, when you run out your all the trucks or all the transport will have to stop. But for critical minerals, it's quite different. Once you formulate as a either solar panel or batteries, you don't need to rely on continuous supply. And in that sense, I think personally there is some over-exaggeration about the critical mineral supply issue. And on the other hand, if we particularly disturb the natural supply chain, that's created and kind of challenges. At least we will see the cost of clean technology will be more expensive. That's not just an affordability issue. Actually, that will be slow down our energy transition and the emission reduction issue. Means globally, our environment are at stake. So I think that's my personal views. And with that in mind, I discovered my former colleague, Dr. Li Xiaoyao, and come out of this particular topic. And I'm very pleased to invite for speakers on this particular topic. We want to hear their view, and then we will joint commentary myself, Li Xia, and also Dr. Mu Yang from Enben will join, and the panelists. We have 4 speakers today. The first is Associate Professor Marina Zhang, who is my colleague, work at UTS Acqui. Her research focuses on technology innovation and global supply chain issue. And then we also have 3 different perspectives, including Anthony Cross from ACBC Green Channel chairperson. He's focused on more like Australia perspective. We also have Ravenna Chan, who is the Asia Pacific executive director for Asia Pacific for Two Star, Chinese origin incubated company. Is very active in the clean and green technology. We also, last but not least, my old friends. I realize, Benny, probably you are the oldest friends I have. I mean, among this cohort, more than 14, not 14 years, I think 14 or 13 years ago. Benny is the manager for policy study at the ASEAN Center Energy, the international governance to support the Southeast Asia Energy Cooperation. So without further ado, I will invite my colleague Marina Zhang to give her presentation. The procedure is that after 4 speakers, we will have discussions, initially probably among our panelists, but we also welcome questions from the floor for us here. And again, I want to remind that the events are recorded and publicly available. We also live stream in a very popular Chinese multimedia platform. So Marina, I give the floor is yours.
Thank you, Xinpeng. So I start to share my screen. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So good morning, everybody in Beijing, and good afternoon, everybody in Australia or whatever. So as Xinpeng said, I'm actually a scholar in innovation, specifically in technological innovation. So, but the innovation framework doesn't matter is at the firm level or is at the macro level, policy level, actually is transferable across different industries. So I'm looking at supply chains for semiconductor industries, pharmaceutical industries, and more in the clean energy transition. So today I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on critical mineral supply chains. So this is, as Xinpeng just mentioned, is gradually becoming the center of geopolitical competition, especially between the US and China. And of course, Australian-China relations are sitting right in the middle of this geopolitical superpower competition. So that's basically why I'm doing this. How can I change? Okay. So the first issue I want to mention is, well, this is slightly different for me to read. So first thing I want to talk about why critical minerals. So as Xinpeng said, critical minerals are very important elements in clean energy transition, especially to meet the targets set in the Paris Agreement. So there are several reasons why critical minerals are so critical in the geopolitical competition. I named according to this diagram. So first is critical to clean energy transition, as I just mentioned, and second, because it's a simple product, largely, but it's embedded in very complex production systems. So when you see, well, you know, the final product from the mining extractions to refinement, processing, and to the final product is nothing as complex as semiconductor chips or pharmaceutical vaccines. It's relatively simple, but the production system is very, very complex because it involves technology and capital investment, and often involving environmental protection organizations and so on. So it is a resource. So put all these critical minerals together as a group. It is unevenly distributed globally. So Australia is a country which is blessed with very rich deposits of most critical minerals, and so are countries such as Indonesia and several ASEAN countries. But most of those critical minerals are non-renewable, so that makes them scarce. So that therefore they become the center of geopolitical competition. And for countries that have developed capabilities in processing critical minerals, they enjoy very strong kind of first mover advantages. So so if you are in the game, you're likely to enjoy your scale advantages and your network advantages and so on. So that makes countries as latecomers basically locked behind, locked out of the production networks. So this is just sort of the situation for China is almost reverse in semiconductor industries. I will probably explain that a bit later. So it also has very long and often very invisible multi-layered supply chains. And last thing I want to mention is it has very long leading time to establish any of those processing facilities. And it also has very long leading time in terms of transferring signals from the market, from the downstream market back to the upstream mining companies. So you really don't know whether you should put your products in the market now or you want to wait. As you perhaps have already realized, a lithium market is fluctuating quite violently recently. The reason is because downstream market is going down. I mean, there are multiple reasons, but anyway, so that happened actually quite several months ago, but it's just reaching back to the upstream supplier of the resources. All right, so how can I do this? So why Australia and then China? So how can I move this aside? Okay. So why Australia and China? I don't know whether you can see it, but you know, is this kind of screen sharing is pretty hopeless. So this is basically just extractions from an article I recently written, and which will be appeared on the East Asia Forum next week, hopefully. So it's why Australia and China. So as I said, the global supply chains for most critical minerals are very long and often multi-layered, and often very small suppliers behind the first and second tier suppliers are invisible, but they're providing very critical inputs in the global production network. And second, the different from other critical resources such as natural gas or oil, so that in which the top 3 countries control less than 40% of the global processing of production outputs. In the critical mineral area, China has a dominant structural advantages. So for most of the products, actually, China holds more than 50% of the market share in terms of processing production outputs. And in this network, Australia and China are in complementary relationship, but gradually they're moving to competition relationship. And so Australia is also entangled between China and US in this geopolitical competition. US wants Australia to join a US-led separate supply chain. So in this so-called friendshoring of supply chains of critical minerals. But economically, for Chinese companies, which have already, especially in lithium, have long-term supply contracts with Australian mines, lithium mines, and some other critical mineral suppliers. So Australia is sort of torn between Washington and Beijing in this sort of geopolitical competition. So that makes Australian-China relations very critical in this critical mineral resources competition. So this is the article I wrote, which was published by the National Interest. So basically, I explained China's structural advantages in rare earths, and I went back to look at the long history of China's industrial policy in the rare earth elements. So which has been which has been criticized savagely by many countries, and China's advantages in this area actually is creating geopolitical tension, because countries concerned that China will use its structural advantages to explore its geopolitical position. So I argued in the article, China is not very likely China will do it, but China is certainly in a position to do this. So I talked a few points. I mean, technologically, China does enjoy a pretty strong position in terms of rare earth processing patents. And China is also the largest market for rare earths. That's second. And third, so China is developing a technology-driven supply chain embedded in the innovation network. So this innovation network is not just about companies that are making a direct contribution to innovation. Rather, it is an ecosystem. So it's China has built these regional-based clusters. So for example, if we say China has less than 20,000 direct R&D personnel in rare earth development, China actually has 300,000 people working in the industry, largely in this kind of clusters. So this is another article I wrote about lithium. So the largest metal on Earth carries heavy geopolitical weight. The reason is, as I said, lithium, well, 3 years ago, it was sort of considered almost a waste in Western Australian mines. But today, it's considered white oil. It carries this very significant geopolitical weight for any country. And on the processing of lithium, China, again, is leading. As I will probably explain a little bit later about how China is developing its electric vehicle industry. Or as you can see recently in global media, especially in China, China's EV market is experiencing, well, ups and downs. And there are multiple reasons. But behind that, behind those fluctuations, you can see China has developed a very strong ecosystem in the EV industry. So because of the downstream market demands, that's EV market, and that transfer that translates back to the supply of lithium. That's on the upper stream of the supply chain. So so now I start to talk about supply chain. So once upon a time, when I started doing research in innovation, and supply chain is a firm level concept. So it's a firm level strategy. And if you know, well, supply chain, who is the global expert? Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, because he knows how to build the global supply chain network and to maximize efficiency. But today, supply chain actually is not a firm level concept anymore. It has become a geopolitical level policy instrument. Every country is talking about it. But that is actually misuse of this concept of supply chain anyway. It's a kind of simplified the framework of supply chain. And it also involves the concepts of value chain. That is a concept used largely by economists, and industrial chain. So that is largely used by industrial policymakers. But anyway, so supply chain is very important framework in understanding the geopolitical competition for critical minerals. So I just quickly go through a few concepts with you. I won't spend more than 30 seconds. So when we're talking about supply chain management, so initially we're talking about how to prevent supply chain vulnerabilities. And then we need to develop a strategy to respond if the worst happened. But there are multiple issues you need to think about it. How frequent a global pandemic can happen? Of course, when it happens, the impact is catastrophic, and also it has a ripple effect. So they will impact not only in the supply chains, and will also impact the society at large. So when you have these kind of issues, these kind of disasters happen in today, well, you can say in recent history, and everybody is so nervous about their supply chain resilience, safety. So in this kind of framework, supply chain safety and resilience actually are prioritized ahead of supply chain efficiency. So that is what companies like Apple, like Tesla, like many great industrial companies are good at. Supply chain efficiency, of course, is pursuing, you're using the smallest costs and you maximize your return. But it seems, well, to manage supply chain resilience and supply chain efficiency, actually they're contradictory to one another, or at least they're offsetting with one another. So this creates a lot of points for policymakers to think, well, shall we just focus on supply chain efficiency that will maximize, well, corporate profits, or shall we focus on resilience? So we need to be always using preventive policies or strategies to make sure nothing's stopped. And I mean, especially in the past 3 years, as the COVID-19, hits every corner in the world, we experienced certainly several supply chain breaks in the world in critical industries, including automobile, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So this is just this is actually a chart from Volkswagen, once one of the largest automobile companies in the world. So they came up with this idea of, well, okay, look at the supply chain, and on the left bottom corner, you can see the global map, and two countries are yellow: China and Australia. Or China, actually Australian, I can't see from my screen, but Australian, kangaroo, and the South American. So those countries are the major suppliers of lithium mines. And China controls, except mining, refining, and the component production and cell production and packaging, all the way down now to the module assemblies, that's EVs. So if you are a company, you're thinking of clean energy transition to EV, well, you have to think about it. Where can you get started? I mean, if the middle part largely controlled by Chinese companies, and of course, you will have this concern whether your supply chain will be resilient and any threats of natural disasters, pandemics, war, or even just a geopolitical competition. For instance, if decoupling of supply chains occur between the US and China. So I'll give you just a few charts and you can see this. All the yellow bars are China. So apart from the top layer, that is extraction, that's China controls some of the minerals, but not much. And in the middle and the down and in the middle mid supply chain range and up and downstream supply chains, all largely controlled by Chinese companies, more than 50% in most areas. So of course, from geopolitical perspective, that is the vulnerability of supply chains of critical minerals. So this again is rare earths. Rare earths, well, different from lithium. If we say lithium is white oil, rare earth elements are considered industrial vitamins. You don't need to have a lot, but you just need essential ones that will sustain your life. I mean, like we take vitamins, so we need to take vitamins to sustain our lives. So you can see China still dominates most of the critical outputs of rare earths, especially in the high temperature resistant permanent magnet that is especially used for in electric engine, electric motors used in the EVs, and also in the in several clean energy technologies in solar and wind. So what I want to tell you is, so Australian, we know, is entangled between Australia and China. So where should Australia go? So because I'm doing research really in innovation, especially in China. So many people argue with me. So tell me what China's innovation is. I said, okay, China's innovation, if you look at breakthroughs, well, China is catching up, but China has developed this very strong position in manufacturing. And you can argue that, well, okay, so relocation of supply chains is happening. So that is perhaps undermine Chinese manufacturing. Well, that is one argument to which I don't agree. And I can tell you, China has actually built this, you see the yellow bottom bit on this smiley curve I marked, is an innovation of manufacturing. I can tell you two things of the advantages of this integration in manufacturing. First is, well, this ecosystem, this integrated manufacturing capacity is based on ecosystems. So what does that mean? Well, it's actually integration of geographic-based clusters. So therefore, I mean, if we're talking about supply chains, now they're very small, very small small operations, each of them focusing on very small niche components or modules, but because of the standardization in production, they can be put together to be used in almost any products. And the advantage of this is, I can tell you, in the during the COVID, why China could quickly move around to produce all those personal protection equipment, including ventilators and including face masks and so on. The reason is because a concept is called supply chain reconfiguration. So small suppliers can be configured to be used in new products. China still has very strong advantages in this area. And if you look at how China can quickly develop the EV supply chains, that is a reason. And for the second reason is still China, because of these advantages, China still controls a large proportion of supply chains, not just direct products used in making, let's say, salts. And China has industrial base, heavy industrial base, for example, chemical dye used in textile, and also other infrastructures, including stable electricity that is obviously very, very important in manufacturing. So, so this is a critical question about Australia. So if Australia, for example, joins the US-led friendshoring or ally-based supply chain in critical minerals, and can this move will have a longer term benefits for the humans to fight against the common enemy of climate change? Or put in a more economic perspective, can this sustain the benefits of open trade and investment? And obviously, if this is happening, and the worst case scenario is China's supply chain, which, as I explained, has controlling the majority of critical minerals, will be cut off. What does that mean? Well, a newly developed supply chains will take years, bearing very high environmental costs to catch up. That will be a long time. Similar things happening for China in the semiconductor industries, because China is not China's choice. I mean, China's, maybe we can argue that is industrial policy mistake. China didn't invest early enough in semiconductor industries. So China now is being a poor kid who is locked out of this club of semiconductor players. And if China wants to develop a self-sustainable semiconductor supply chains, we can imagine they'll take years, maybe decades. Similar things in the critical minerals, because China has developed, because its own market is so big, has developed this advantage, and it will take the West allies similar amount of time to catch up, bearing very high environmental costs. So this is just to quickly some charts showing the China's advantages. So this is an article.
Marina, probably just a little bit speed up. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So how many minutes do I have?
Probably already done. Probably 1
All
minute
right, okay.
or 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Thank you. So so innovation ecosystem, and this is again it's not quite critical, but is this one actually is important. So the top 10 countries for energy transition investment, 2022, China, the total investment actually is more than the next 3 countries combined. So this is the article I read yesterday on Financial Times. So I highlight this one. What the narratives is missing is China is the largest producer of rare earths because it is the largest consumer of rare earths. So as I said, this is a circle. You need to have a market demand to drive your innovation in the supply side. So, so World Economic Forum last week, energy, climate, and innovation are the theme. So cooperation in a fragmented world is key to our success of humanity to fight against climate change. So what shall we do? I want to just read through one question to you. So the means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means? Remember, in the fight against climate change, the ends cannot be justified because we're facing deadlines. So last I want to share with you is my thought, because I'm a science fiction fan. So I watched this Wandering Earth recently. I wrote even a reviewing article about it. So one thing I want to share with you is a quote from the character. Humans spend too much of their intelligence on destroying one another. In times of crisis, global collaboration is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina, for a very good summary of the key issues and debate, and also raised interesting question. I think one of the things that highlights that resilience, efficiency, and I think at the back is whether we should intervene or whether political force or geopolitical should intervene from the clean energy transition perspective. I think once we get that clear, then probably the answer will be relatively easy. But very unfortunately, those geopolitical struggling now bring our common enemy, exactly the climate change, will put climate change at stake, and we're prepared probably pay a cost. With that, actually, we invite two presenters from senior executive from industry. First, the Anthony Kos, who is the chairperson of the Net Zero or the Australia-China Chamber of Business, who I think have a strong business collection, and who himself is also a senior business person. Probably we want to hear your views. Probably might be slide from academic and more close to the industry and the reality. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just checking everyone can see that screen okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to present today. So, as you said, Xinpeng, my perspective is going to be from a business perspective. So I will just provide, I guess, my background is actually from a marketing perspective. My family are in retail, and my father taught me about how to understand a market by walking around and talking to your customers. So I have had experience both in the startup innovation area, but also in the corporate C-level area with clean tech being my focus since 2008. As you mentioned, a fair bit of involvement in Asia, probably spending 3 to 4 months a year in market pre-COVID, and still very active through that period. And I'm on the national board of the Australia-China Business Council. So when posed with this question for today around the presentation, I really was challenged with how to embrace this, improving the resilience of Asia's clean tech supply chain, because it is not just Australia's responsibility, and it's also how, as Marina was mentioning very clearly, how we need to integrate. Because when you can see from these charts, the challenge ahead of what this transition is and where we're at the moment is huge. And also, when you look at the relative locations for where this responsibility lies, we also can see some shared responsibility both within the North America region for demand for energy. China's 30% there, but also emissions. And I don't even see Australia on this little map there somewhere. So there's always been this perspective that that we, as a country, Australia hasn't got a big role to play. But that said, the United Nations has made it very clear that there's new fossil fuel investment is delusional if we're trying to achieve our targets. Australia at the same time is running around saying it wants to be a green economy superpower whilst balancing the economic challenges of its natural resources in coal and gas. And so I'm proposing that as an opportunity for Australia in not only solving the resilience in the supply chains, but as being a leader in this green economy opportunity, we also need to match that with some integrity with our own actions. We have had some tremendous success here with a company called Kanchi Lithium, who invested over $1 billion in the largest processing plant for lithium outside of China. And that has been a big contributor to Australia's growth in the player in the lithium market. But at the same time, there's certainly a rhetoric, as Marina mentioned, that we are tightening our reliance and allegiances to a US-focused supply chain. And we really need to be careful about this, because the lessons from the US is that they know that they can't do this alone without China. And the CATL, the largest battery manufacturer, has just made a commitment with Ford to actually build a battery factory in Detroit, in Michigan. And so what Australia risks here by not actually having a strategic long-term view of its role in the region is that we are giving away and leaving ourselves as an exporter of primary minerals, as opposed to building our position in this value-added supply chain. Again, in this challenge of Australia being a green energy superpower, I just need Australia to take a bit of a perspective pill, in that China just added, is looking to add 160 gigawatts of renewables this year, and Australia did 3 gigawatts last year. And all of these numbers are nothing compared to what we have to do moving forward. That said, Australia has demonstrated some great leadership in this area. South Australia, the state that I'm from originally, has actually been a leader in the integration of renewables into its grid, and some tremendous learnings about the challenges and the benefits of actually doing that. China itself has set itself some very aggressive targets for its energy transition, and the acceptance has to be that there's still going to be a very large commitment of fossil fuels in its mix, towards its goal for peak carbon in 2030. However, from an Australian perspective, when you look at where they're heading in 2060, we don't see any dialogue really around our opportunity to participate in potentially the innovation around their commitment to a 500% increase in their nuclear capacity. So when I look at clean tech, I see that in the three silos of the generation side of it, which we're all talking about at the moment. There's the efficiency side of it with the grid and transport and buildings. And then there's the environmental side of it with air, soil and water. And again, in all of these areas, I'm very bullish about the opportunity for Australia's role in innovation in this, and actual Southeast Asian region as a place for that. And certainly, as the ISETS has set as its vision for itself, the energy transition is the biggest challenge. And this is the area we can have the biggest impact. And this is the area where I'm delighted to have the opportunity in forums like this to contribute. Because Australia's reality is that it is falling behind in innovation in the application because of our loss of the manufacturing layer in our national economy. We don't have the environment such as what China has done in the last 10 years, as I'll show in a second, around EVs and batteries. So without that manufacturing layer, you don't have the opportunity to fund and drive innovation because you don't have the industrial pull-through of that technology. We have some tremendous advantages in the mining sector in that area, and I certainly feel that's one of the opportunities for innovation. So my learnings from China have come from a really fortunate opportunity of working with a group called TUS Holdings, which is one of the largest science park innovation and economic development zone companies. And they've been really a driver of this industrial transformation and ecosystem development. And as Ravenna will share probably a bit in a moment, what they're doing around this supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. And from an Australian perspective, what I'm wanting to, I guess, share in this session is what is the learnings from what China has done in the last 10 years to address its recognized risks and gaps, and how it has really accelerated its success in these areas. Herbert Chen, who was the president of TUS Holdings, is also the global president of the International Association of Science Parks and Areas of Innovation. And the highlight here is it's not an area that Australia excels in. So when you look at the way that China has delivered its successful outcomes, the way that it's applying that, sharing that knowledge internationally, how does Australia participate? Through my role with the Australia-China Business Council, we were also very fortunate to secure a relationship with the Association of Green Industrial Parks in China. And this sits under the Ministry of Commerce, and really of the 2,000 odd industrial parks, there's probably 250 that are national level. There's about 50 of them that are focused on green development, as that's energy in, waste out, and economic development and growth. And we're very keen to be able to working with them this year on drawing on some of their learnings and also working very closely with some Australian states and businesses in the sharing of that knowledge. And looking forward to actually taking a delegation up in April. What they've done is develop this program where you're actually able to self-audit your green footprint. And so part of the challenge for foreign companies going into China is that there's going to be a new level of commitment required to make sure you're contributing to their high quality growth agenda. The other exciting element of their work is global program on sharing knowledge and supporting commercialization of innovation and technology in the clean tech sector, which is again sitting within these science parks, which is driving the learnings. And these learnings are really what has been driving the efficiencies and growth of renewable globally. And when people look at the China market, they probably don't see, outside of China, we probably know of one major turbine manufacturer. Inside there's half a dozen who are really driving that growth. And as Marina mentioned, they're consolidating those supply chains and they're providing the demand, which is also driving supply. The same could be said around PV. I have been involved in that sector for over 12 years and saw very clearly the transformation within local government and industry. But all I can reinforce with this is that all of the fear factor around this supply chain resilience is insignificant when you look at the challenge of scale of the growth of what is required for us to achieve our net zero targets in the next 20, 30 years. And so from an Australian perspective, we've got plenty of natural resources. We just don't have the commitment to actually have a strategic drive to, we could have a dozen solar PV manufacturers in Australia and still not put a dent in the demand for the global supply. Same again in the EV sector. Again, this figure here was 2021, 6.8 million total. China itself last year, 2022, sold over nearly 7 million EVs. So that doubled again in 1 year, 100% growth in EV sales and a lot of growth now in exports, which is again starting to bother the global structures. Out of that, again, in 10 years, you've had the growth of these battery companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. And with that, that's driven this supply chain demand for these new minerals. Again, Australia has benefited from its natural abundance, but its growth in its actual production capacity has absolutely been as a result of its partnerships and the investment from Chinese value-added manufacturing into Australia. And the same is going to happen in hydrogen with electrolyzers. I had a lot to do with this sector the last couple of years. And again, these figures are pretty scary when you look at where we're at and where we're going as far as the actual global demand. The opportunity for new manufacturing capacity in all parts of Southeast Asia is tremendous. Fortunately, Australia is already collaborating in a very key area in the green steel market. So Rio Tinto and Tsinghua University have a joint research institute that's been operating for over 10 years. And last year we were involved in a number of discussions that were accelerating the collaboration projects. We know that Southeast Asia is already working closely with China, one of the biggest supporters of investments in green energy around the Belt and Road has been the ASEAN region. And obviously you've been through the challenges and benefits of the high-speed rail development through the corridor through to Singapore. What we're trying to propose in the Australia-China Business Council's education work within Australia is that we need to learn from what other countries in our region, like Thailand, who is supporting investments in BYD, building a EV manufacturing facility there, and Thai Solar. Ravenna may well mention that her group, TUS Holdings, is one of the companies supporting that. In the Philippines, the Philippine president has just been up to Beijing, a new renewed commitment to the regional economic partnership, and also really strong commitment to green finance funding through the G20 collaboration. Learning like Indonesia with their collaboration with EVs and batteries. Again, TUS Holdings down there with their science parks and innovation precincts. And Malaysia, a terrific story there with EV Energy building a lithium battery manufacturing plant for the two-wheel market and power tool market. So again, as an outcome of conversations and collaborations at a government level that are then driven by business outcomes. And so continue to Singapore, where again, a very strong relationship with China, and Australia itself has just signed a green economy agreement with Singapore, which took a year to implement and another year to try to find out what to do next. So we're certainly trying to drive some of those outcomes. On the supply chain front, I tried to push people away from the fear factor of talking about resilience, because there's already a shift in supply chains moving to Asia as Asia grows in its importance in the economic drivers of the global economy. What we're really seeing, and Marina touched on this as well, is a bit of defense of economic dominance. And when you look at the shape of the global, I guess, influence of economics, then what we're seeing is a real negative influence on our ability to achieve these net zero goals in this defending the economic reality around this new green economy. And what we're saying is that we need to solve this global challenge together, because the amount of investment required, as we touched on before, there's four times the level of investment in 2020 is still needed by 2030 and 2050. There's $1 trillion industry and enough investment for wind turbines, solar panels, and lithium batteries and electrolyzers and fuel cells. There's opportunities in all countries in ASEAN and Australia outside of China. It's not about being afraid of China's control. It's about learning and how to grow and scale. Because from Australia's point of view, we need to accept the reality that our population, our GDP, our market size is not where the influence is going to be. And we need to consider what our role is going to be in this region, because the growth in middle income, another billion coming in through China and India and in the ASEAN markets. And so this is where the consumer demand will be, and this is where the innovation and commercial outcomes will come from. And again, it's not just in ASEAN, it's the global south, a real shift in influence and impact. So Australia's China relationship, what we're trying to reinforce is that we're all interconnected with China, trade and investment and people flows. And what will Australia's role be in Asia? Supply, yes, but we need to do more of the value add, and we shouldn't be doing it in isolation of China. We should be working with China. We also need to learn as a country to invest in market with one of the smallest percentage of outbound foreign direct investment from our commercial companies. And we need to get out of our own backyard and start to invest in the region. We also need to look at our role in this very growing area of carbon markets and the needs for a carbon market in itself in Australia. And what is Australia's role in leadership in this transition? We need to accelerate the green economy transition. We need the development of new green products, and that's where R&D and IP and wealth creation comes from, and lead the monitoring of the integrity of this through fintech and new clean tech. Because security is going to take the form of emergency response and emergency services, as well as this need for an independent voice on this global peace and stability. So just in closing again, it's all clean tech for me, and being involved in the innovation space is a huge upside for me. But again, as Marina said, it's a huge task to deliver, or humanity has got a few reality checks ahead of itself. We need to improve the resilience of supply chains, but we need to learn of how China has been so successful and how we might need to emulate that in the regions in the ASEAN region. I feel that there's the asterisk there. This is a personal point of view, not the statement from the ACBC. However, Australia itself should be a green economic development zone where we can actually be a centre of excellence where you can come and trial and develop and showcase what could be done within our high penetration of renewables. But you need to scale, you need to go to where those global markets are. Because at the end of the day, we need to achieve net zero faster together. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. I think one of the issue I can identify is that when Marina mentioned the supply chain security was borrowed from firms and to aggregate level to serve probably, unfortunately, for the geopolitical game. But from your business perspective and view, actually such kind of things probably very unfortunate. Even if there is a supply chain issue, but they are more important to not excluding China or any particular kind of outer supply chain in order to maximize the potential for the green growth, and also in terms of collaboration from experience. As you highlight, China also done something quite good. So I think there will be something leaving for the discussion later on. I probably now invited, I think the next is Ravenna. Ravenna talking about from China's perspective. Ravenna is the CEO for the Asia Pacific for the TwoSty, who is an incubator will help our clean energy startup to grow up. Yeah, Ravenna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Xu, and thank you for this chance we can sharing from our perspective about the why China and Australia need to keep a good relationship. So I will go into sharing my screen. So you guys can see my screen already, right?
Yeah, no problem.
That's
it's not in the showing model. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So today my sharing is still loading. Yeah. So today my sharing topic, I will be quite focused on the RCEP tech innovation and the collaboration chance. Why we mention RCEP, because actually for the past years, like later I will have the statistic to showing the China foreigner directly investment in Australia, how it's changed. But RCEP actually is one of the good things link China, South Asia, and Australia together, including New Zealand. So this is some of my background. So I believe Dr. Xu already mentioned a lot about TUSTA holding, and also Anthony mentioned some. And here's my personal background. So I'm also the entrepreneur in South Asia, and I'm growing and born in China. And currently we have space in Australia. So I'm quite focused on looking for the collaboration between China and Australia, especially in green tech. And here is some background about our company. So TUS Holding actually established in 1994, which is originally from the Tsinghua University. So currently we are also the biggest technology ecosystem in the whole world, which is we do have more than 300 hubs over the world. So for TUSTA, we are quite focused on the deep tech incubator for early stage companies and also investments. And here is our segment of what kind of industry we're looking for and what kind of things we can do. So basically, we've got the tech park, including incubator, TUS Park, TUS City, and for industry, we're quite focused on environment, clean energy, healthy, digital transformation, new material, and others, including TUS education, TUS snow, this kind of things. And we've got a VC and a PE as well. So we're happy to looking for the startup, especially the company who have the global operation planning. We're happy to link our VC or PE to join. And this is our Australia space landing from last year from the biggest, one of the big green tech summit as well. So this is our international strategy. Basically, I want to make our company introduction as short as possible. I want to more focus on the content I'm going to be sharing. I believe majority of the person who is here today is quite a high professional. So you guys already quite understanding about RCEP, about China, about Australia. And this is some statistic from this 10 countries. and plus these 5 countries, what is the population, what is GDP, what is the 3 mainly industry growing very fast in this those countries. So we can tell actually, because population is kind of means the market as well, and the GDP is kind of means the country's development as well, and the top 3 industries kind of means what kind of industry this company, this country is focused. So there's some statistic we can say very clear about this area, what is overview of this area. And we can, maybe I will be more focused on the South Asia, and for the geographic location and the political system and the economy development is totally different. So we separate them for like a different level about what kind of country we should go first, what kind of country more suitable for which industry. And because actually they have different politics system, which is also we cannot consider them as a whole, as one one economy. So they still separate and still have a different way to do business ways. And this is investment, like a financial stage and early stage financial increase, how it's increased for the past years. Because one of the big difference between China and American is majority of the China people investment in property, and the less of them investment in early stage investment or VC, which is in America, they have quite kind of equal statistic. The people who is investment in property and the people who is investment in startups. And we can tell from the past years, actually a lot of people start working for the early stage investment, especially pre-A. Also because this kind of stage, you can invest in that, but also means that it's a higher risk as well. So, but based on the geographic, we can say it's keep growing. So it means like people start to investment a lot, and it's have a little bit of drop since 2019. And if we recall back about that time, actually that is the time of internet companies growing super fast. A lot of like that is the time maybe the company can raise money, use the business proposal only. No need test, no need data, no need MVP, no need demo yet. But all the things start to change, and all the investors become more smart as well. So it's slightly dropped a little bit, but compared with 5 years ago, this number still like roughly increased a lot. And this is the China and Australia investment overview. So we can tell actually before 2018, like all the, we can say that a golden year, the China investment a lot, but 2021 also because COVID, people cannot to have the physical meeting, so the investment actually dropped a lot. But where is the money going? If the money not come to Australia, where they are going to South Asia. So this is the geographic growth growing for the past years for the China investments in South Asia. And we can see a lot of like FSV, like Gobi, they are the company originally from, they are the VC originally from China and the Square from Japan. And now they are looking for this industry. And also we can tell like the 500 startup, and we can hear from Accelerate Asia and Antlers. Also Antler have in Australia as well. They also have the industry in South Asia as well. But why I mentioned here, because I feel like there's more like the bridge between China and Australia currently, not only because the geographical location, but also because of the economy development and also the technology exchange. And here is some unicorn for the past years happened in South Asia and China, Australia, Japan, Korean, and New Zealand. We can tell like the company Canva, the company like Our Wallet, actually they got a lot of investors from Japan and China as well, but they are from Australia and they become the unicorn. And at the same time, like we can say like a Grab, like the Stay Group, GoJet, and the GoJet just together with Tokopedia, so now they become GoTo. It's become the unicorn company in South Asia. So it's a big market as well, and it's big collaboration chance now between China, and Southeast Asia and Australia. So we are happy to enhance and build more collaboration between these three regions to build or maybe to create to incubate more unicorns across the border. Like for example, we can say Australia is super big for land, but it's small for population for market. But South Asia is big, is small for land, small for population, but big for this economy is quite similar. And China is big, but not globalization enough to talk with overseas people. Like I do have the investor friends, they prefer talking to the company in South Asia rather than a company from Japan or Korea. And we're quite curious, like why, including Australia, but why? Because he said that the company at a certain stage, they have to go to the global operator, global things. But the company who is in South Asia, in Australia, they are more used to speak English. So it's easier to access more investors rather than the company from Japan and Korea, same as China. So that we can say, okay, we can hire someone who can speak English, which is not difficult. But at the same time, the BD will be not present the same as the founder or the CEO. So we're still happy to enhance this one. And also this is a reason Tesla trying to locate in Australia from last year, because we noticed here have the big chance here to enhance the research, commercialize to development better, become a deep tech startup and commercialize them in South Asia and China. And here is some other reasons why, because this is a basic how the company growing, how the country growing, and how the startup growing. We can say from a logistic industry, the logistic market is growing at 5% from 2018 to 2024, which is, this is a basic thing, because we got logistic, we got the trading, we got exchange, we got the deal, which is deal can make it happen. So this is what happened for the past years. And we do have some unicorn like a Flash from Thailand, WHA, the company we are collaboration in Thailand as well as IPO company in Thailand. And also those is a company, they are linked China and Australia and South Asia together. And this is lifestyle, which is, I usually take this as example, like how we have the daily life in China different with overseas. Like maybe when we wake up, we open Douyin and look what kind of hot topic we have today. And we need to go out, we book Didi, and we got the car. And then sometimes we're shopping from Taobao, we're from Dingdong, and then we payment with WeChat and Alipay, which is this kind of ecosystem, this kind of lifestyle is start to become same as South Asia as well. And which is Australia have a lot of base is already there. Like we also have Uber here, we have Air Wallet, we have Canva, we have different after pay, before pay, this kind of things already like a growing super fast, and they get a good investment, but it's also dropping quite faster recently. And this is agriculture, which is also one core industry, no matter in China, in Australia, or in some South Asia country as well. So this part, like a majority of the agriculture in Australia, they are super big. Sometimes they still need a lot, like they are quite technology, a lot of robotic already used instead of use a lab, same as China. And we do happy to involve the more technology, what we're already using now, and what we already have research, but we don't have the commercialized part yet to make more commercialized in Australia. For example, when we're going to the South Australia, Adelaide, we're talking with a government person. We're talking about we got the robotic can carting the grape. We got the robotic can help all the farmer to make it more efficient, like smart farming, this kind of system, no matter software or hardware, which is they're quite exciting to understand more about it. And also we also plan to have this kind of like help all the farmers understanding technology better. And this is about information and communication. Also, we can say no matter what kind of industry, this geography is all the growing super faster, and also like the SaaS platform, the PaaS platform, and now we got RPA. Even recently, the chat box, the ChatGPT is super popular. It's also about information and communication technology actually growing super fast. And those actually can break the barrier between China and Australia, no matter the information barrier or the different resource we got. Actually, once it's like when these two countries have very good relationship and they would like to collaboration with each other, we got a lot of very top research results from Australia. And we have a lot of very top professors, they are working in Australia currently as well. And here is about the green tech, which is, I believe, majority of the speaker today. They are quite interesting as well. So for this part, we can tell actually the hydropower actually become one of the very important things. And when I travel in Australia for the past 6 months, we also talk a lot with this kind of hydrogen supply or hydrogen technology companies. There's some of them from Germany, from Europe, some of them they want to landing here from China, but they're still worried about the politics things. And we can say last week we have EV summit in Melbourne. Also, we got a lot of attendings, super curious about what happened in China, what EV cars promotion, what EV car going in China. And we got the battery storage technology, we got the specific technology to get the aluminum from the salty lake, and a different technology, which is we're happy to open the door to collaboration with Australian companies and Australia industry researchers to say what we can do more here. And also other green tech growing is super fast. And here is impact of ISETS in China. So after 2021, 1st of January, the ISETS starts active efficiently. Actually, it's impacted a lot about the trading and also the exchange between China and South Asia. And I do believe this one, which is I saw the report from Australia government website, which is Australia quite supported this one as well. That's why we said we're happy to use South Asia as a bridge to link China and Australia together to do more on the matter business trading or the exchange. And here is some other parts, what kind of the info, what kind of a chance, what kind of the opportunity here. First part, solving the cross-border issue, no matter the financial translation or the language barrier or the inconvenience, scientific research standards is not very similar. So also a lot of projects we're doing now, trying to make both sides have similar standards. Or we can follow the part who have higher standard. Like Australia, a lot of research, actually, they do have very high standard for the international level. So we're happy to say, okay, if this is standard, it's super good. Why we not follow the standard to build the things, to do things? And this certification can be recognized in South Asia or in China as well, which is we're trying to build a co-research lab or co-research report, those kind of things. And also the platform construction. For example, we have 20,000 companies in our platform. So how can we let Australian company understand what kind of technology we have, what kind of company incubator, and what kind of segment investment in? So we're happy to open this platform to people to look what kind of things they are looking for. And this is solving the independent docking of technology innovation entrepreneur with network. That is why we set our hub in different countries and a collaboration with local company, local big player or the local government or local universities. Because this university, government, and the local leading industry, actually, they are the three big platforms to collection all the requirements of technology and the collection all the technology together. We wanted to promotion it. We wanted to open this gate to everybody, make the network get a deal easier. And this is from my perspective. It's my time finished.
Yeah, thank you, Ravina. Very interesting. Actually, you mentioned ASEAN's role in the Australia-China collaboration, particularly from investment perspective. Indeed, I think one of the questions I probably ask, but later we can discuss is that for those so-called shift investment from Australia to China, whether partly because the Europeans' restrictions on China's solar panel, others that probably encourage some relocation of production from China to Southeast Asia in order to access the premier European and North American market. But you don't need to answer now, but we can discuss later on. And I think our last but not least is Benny Suryadi. As I mentioned, is my longtime friend, more than decades. He is a manager for policy study at the ASEAN Center for Energy, and I think his perspective more like from other regions on how this issue. Because one of the challenges when we're talking about the supply chain security and the geopolitical competition is a lot just between Australia and China, US and China. Actually, the other regions are probably innocently will be involved and also pay a price if they want to move in for low carbon growth due to higher price and even sometimes probably affordability. But let's see what Benny will say. Benny, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Songpeng, Rob, for having me in this discussion, contributing to our discussion this morning or the afternoon Australian time from the perspective of ASEAN. I mean, as we are sitting in the between China and Australia, and for many issues that mentioned by previous speakers is that ASEAN is very much also rely or connected with Australia and China. And but as a short introduction, that's going to be, as Rob mentioned, that I'm working for the ASEAN Center for Energy. It's an intergovernmental organization that represents the interests of the 10 ASEAN member states in the energy sectors. And as Rob mentioned, we are in the public domain discussion. This is so my limit on what I can say on the perspective of the governments to this context, because mineralism is still ongoing process and our end. This is just a brief on what the ASEAN aspiring to go, the energy cooperation in ASEAN. This is also become a reference document in our collaboration with various dialogue partners, including China and Australia, supporting the ASEAN to achieve our common goals on energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. And this is not much to talk. I mean, as everyone knows, that ASEAN is very much rely on the fossil fuels. The share of the fossil fuels remain the same for the last 20 years, more than 80% in our energy mix. But we can't deny that the fossil fuels has contributed significantly to fuel the economic growth in this region. That makes ASEAN is among it's going to be in the front line of the global economic growth. But then the complexity of the situation that we have in each particular countries, and also in the regional level, that as ASEAN countries is continuously exploring multiple futures, finding the right path for the region, for the countries to move towards the energy transition. In the various modeling scenario that we have, that we projected, that's still quite a challenge, and where it's while the energy demand is expected to be able to reduce, but the share or the contribution coming from the fossil fuel is still very much higher in the futures. And this is also reflected in the projection that we have on our aspiration on the renewable energy target. The ASEAN is aimed to have a 23% of renewable energy by 2025. today we still run 14%, same figure with the 2 years ago. That's going to be, and the existing policy are projected to be unable to meet the regional target of the 23% of renewable energy in 2025. And even, I mean, it's going to be in the most of the modeling that we projected that even until 2050s, that ASEAN will still have a challenge to bring more renewable energy into energy mix. This is somehow is also reflected that on the demand of the critical mineral to fulfill the renewable energy needs in the ASEAN region. But then, as I mentioned earlier, that's ASEAN is pretty much reliant on the fossil fuels, where in the context of natural gas, we quite have a trade surplus of natural gas. As you see on the chart of the trade balance. But ASEAN itself is highly dependent on the natural gas of the other ASEAN countries. 2 examples from the Thailand and then the Singapore. But then I also can see that how countries in this region is also relying, Thailand and Singapore is relying to the Australia to fulfill its demand on the natural gas. And in our projection that in 2024, 2025, that ASEAN is expected to become net import of natural gas. So it's quite a challenge for the region in its energy transition efforts. Oil, I mean, it's already a deficit since 1995, but it continues to become deficits. But some countries like Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia are at the riskiest position compared to the others countries, even though we still have a Brunei and Malaysia at a better position with they still have a higher production on the oil. Gold, quote unquote, is still a good story at this point. I mean, put a quote unquote, the good story that's going to be with Indonesia representing the ASEAN net trade balance of coal. It's pretty much relying on the Indonesia context, but while most ASEAN countries is positioned as importing countries in global supply chain of coal, including Malaysia and Philippines and Thailand at the most risk position. Then even with the high production from Indonesia, that ASEAN as a whole is also expected to become net importer of coal by 2039. So in 2040, that even all the fossil fuels is become a net importer. So is again put a pressure that on ASEAN securing the energy transition, balancing the share of the fossil fuel and renewable energy context. But speaking about the value chain, it's going to be on the downstream and upstream sectors. I have an example from Indonesia and the supply chain. When we see specific case in Indonesia, where mining, foreign import, and financial intermediation account for 80% share of the total intermediate input for transaction economic of coke, refined petroleum, and nuclear. But it's also a similar figure that we can see in the downstream sector for the same items on the industry of coke, refined petroleum, and nuclear fuels in Indonesia, where the consumption is also very much higher, account for 66% of the economic transaction. This is to show that the heavy reliance of this supply chain, particularly in the context of Indonesia. But then back to the ASEAN itself, ASEAN in the global value chain for low carbon technologies. So we assess that most of Asian countries are positioned in the upstream state of low carbon technology, maybe except Brunei. So it's also at least indicated that most Asian countries are involved in the global value chains of the low carbon technology, although that's primarily as a supplier of the material. And you can also see that how Malaysia and Thailand are among the tops of the key players in ASEAN region. And it's also have a comparison with the other countries like China and Australia. But for the ASEAN itself, we indicated the trade openness, investment policy, and other supporting policy for deployment of low carbon technology. Just two countries are more favorable. And speaking on the narrative, this is more a narrative, not much that I can share in the public discussion. That's going to be mining mineral and metals from the material base of any modern economy, as we all know. This is why the development of the mineral sectors in our ASEAN is key for our socio-economic development. And ASEAN itself is one of the largest markets in the world for the supply of the mineral material, and ASEAN member states, Indonesia are among the top global supplier of major mineral and metal products. Trade mineral accounted for around 250 billion, or close to 9% of the ASEAN's total trade in 2018, and 21% of it are internal trades. And recognizing the important issue of the mineral, especially critical mineral, that's going to be ASEAN established a high levels agreement on the ministerial understanding on the ASEAN cooperation in mineral, which aim to develop to develop the mineral sector to be engine for the greater economic growth, for social progress in ASEAN, to enhance trade and investment, and also to promote environmentally sound and socially responsible mineral development. And at a very high level, that movement toward low carbon economy, particularly the rising use of efficient renewable energy, such as energy storage on electric vehicle, as well as the high technology and small automation, will drastically change the pattern of the mineral market, including here in ASEAN region. Then just to conclude with my brief highlight, it can be, duplication of the trade, energy flow, the ASEAN and the global supply chains for us need to be reset and to be reprioritized. Then redesigning the ASEAN energy securities depend not only on ASEAN position in the global supply chain of the fossil fuels or the supply chain of the critical mineral, but it also depend on the trade characteristic of the both of the countries and regional levels and the type of the materials itself. Moreover, the spillover impact of the fossil fuels or also critical mineral on the other interconnected sectors also need to be considered for us in this region, especially listening that how the China is experiencing to go with it, and also Australia playing a significant role in the global context and connected with the ASEAN region. Last but not least, additional point that going to be, as mentioned earlier, that's going to be in the current trajectory, the future for renewable energy in the region is also not so good. But then it's also rely on the supply of critical mineral, and then how country in this region is playing a role in the whole supply chains. This is some further readings reference conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Happy to have a follow-up discussion. Back to you, Dr. Ro.
Yeah, thank you, Benny. And thanks for highlights on the region, probably quite different from either Australia or China, in that the region still faces significant challenge in order to achieve lower emissions. And I think in that case, actually, affordable and available clean technology and equipment are critical and important. Before that, Ravina mentioned that there are a lot of investment into ASEAN, but they're probably still not enough. And I think Benny highlights the need for collaborations for countries to at least help the regions to achieve better. I think that link back to early presentation from Antonis, that is very, very important from business perspective to have the technology and make things happen and work together. And then I think the overall is back to Marina's question, that whether the supply security have been used properly in the debate and the discussion. I think before I open the floor, I probably invite two panelists here. One is Dr. Yao Lixia, sitting in the rooms, and as well as Dr. Yang Muyi. I have to apologize, I think, due to the security settings, our participants from China, none of them can attend today because that's another issue with these kind of things, because the Zoom was not formally available in China, so they couldn't log in and they couldn't participate. And here it's very, very unfortunate, but we will make it available on ISETS YouTube channel, probably other multimedia channel, to let people to watch the discussion and debate here. Now I hand the floor to my colleague here. Yeah, today we have interesting. We have a small group in Accra office, but all other key speakers are located in the different cities, 3 in Australia and 1 in Indonesia, Southeast Asia. So Lixia probably can give you comments or questions, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the 4 presenters give very interesting presentation, talk about the relevant issues relating with the supply chain on the low carbon technologies. But what I would like to raise a concern or highlight my question is that actually I think China is top in manufacturing the renewable energy or low carbon capabilities, such as the solar power, wind turbines, and but the problem is, I think, for example, during the past 3 years, the raw materials for producing such capabilities like the solar power or the wind turbines was affected or disrupted by the pandemic. And I'm not saying, currently I do not want to touch the point of geopolitical issues or geopolitical conflict, but just the pandemic, only the pandemic had already affected the supply chain of the raw materials for producing such renewable capabilities. So that's my concern. So I would like to also to seek opinions from the presenters or the or my colleague Mui and Xunpeng. So let's just put the geopolitical issues aside for the moment. So just let's talking about the pandemic. So the pandemic already affected the supply chain of the low carbon technologies. So what do you think? When the pandemic has already ended, or it's supposed to end soon. So basically now we are back to normal. Our life, our living situation has been. We are back to normal situation. So what do you think if the supply chain would also kind of back to the normal situation?
Yeah, I think I will leave the response later, and I move to Muyi Yang, who is a senior policy analyst at MBED. I just forgot to mention that Lixia Yao is the head of energy security at Energy Study Institute, National University, Singapore. So Muyi. Yeah.
Thanks, Professor Xunpeng, for having me here in this very interesting and timely discussion on supply chain resilience in Asia. And I think I also learned a lot from today's presentation we had this afternoon so far. And also, as my quick reaction to Lixia's question, I think once the life is back to normal, now we should start looking at our biggest challenge, which is climate change. And to address this challenge, probably to accelerating the transition towards a clean and sustainable energy future is a must, because the energy sector is one of the largest contributor to this climate change challenge. And here I just want to share some of my thoughts on how Australia and China can work together to strengthen the resilience of the clean technology supply chain in Asia, and how this can contribute to the energy transition in the region. As Professor Maria mentioned earlier in her presentation, China is dominating the critical mineral supply chain, especially the demand side. And from Australia perspective, this could be a resilience challenge for Australia, because basically, there is only one buyer or one dominant buyer for Australia's product, critical minerals. But I think this is understandable because China has set up a very ambitious goal of achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. And to decarbonize the Chinese economy would be a huge task. This will require huge amount of investment into clean technology, and lots of electric vehicles, wind turbines, and solar panels need to be built. Of course, this will create huge demand for critical mineral. So now going back to how to strengthen the resilience of critical mineral supply chain, I think from Australia's perspective, the solution is to create more buyers, so that that once the demand is growing, then China's domination will become relatively less. And one potential big buyers of Australia's critical mineral would be ASEAN countries. And this region has recently showed their ambitions to further ramp up their efforts to decarbonize their national economies. Just think about most of the countries in this region has set up a goal to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. And Indonesia, Vietnam, and so many other countries in the region has also committed to reducing their reliance on coal and other fossil fuels for producing electricity and so on. So now to make this happen, probably Australia and China can work together to help build up the manufacturing capacity and capability for producing clean technologies for ASEAN countries. This can help accelerate the clean energy transition in this region, and also create a demand for critical minerals produced in Australia. And this will also help improve the resilience of critical mineral supply chains. And if I have a couple more minutes, there's some other things I want to share here. I think one key question people may ask is that why China want to help ASEAN countries build up its own manufacturing capabilities and capacity for clean technology. Why not China just take this opportunity and use this to boost its own economy? I think the answer from my perspective, my point of view, is that it's quite simple. Because if the whole world is going to be decarbonized, the demand for clean technology will be huge. And it will be impossible for any single countries to meet all this demand, even for China. And another answer I have in mind is that the production and consumption of fossil fuels has made huge contribution to economic growth and social prosperity since the Industrial Revolution. And as a result of that, fossil fuels has actually become a foundational aspect of modern economy. If we are moving away from fossil fuels, that means that we have to actually rebuild our modern economy around clean energy and clean technologies. Because of that, I think all countries may need to localize part of the supply chain for producing clean technology as part of their own social economy rebuilding process. And also another thing is that I think it won't make much economic sense for any single countries to internalize the whole supply chains for clean technology without considering their own comparative advantage, not to mention the wider ramifications that may potentially arise from this supply chain internalization into the social, economic, and geopolitical domains. I think that's some of my initial thought I want to share with all the audience and speakers and panelists today. Thank you, and back to you, Professor Shi.
Yeah, thank you, Mui. I think both panelists raised the issue very interesting. The first about the COVID challenge, because even we have a supply security issue, even we assume the concept from micro firm to macro level is reasonable, the course will be different. If it's COVID, we probably will work together rather than we say we remove this or exclude this or others. I think that probably also business perspective. I think Mui is raised another question that what the cause or drive for this collaboration challenge. So I have a hypothesis. I think probably following Mui's comments, probably and also Antoni's comment, probably it's better actually leave the supply chain if possible with the business sector, like Maria mentioned that the Apple's boss is the best one to manage the supply chain. So for the issue, actually leave or depoliticize and make actually probably our life better. But that's just my hypothesis. I probably now invite other presenter to have briefly comments. I probably follow the same order, and then I'm probably open to the floor for any additional comments.
So you asked me to go first?
Yeah, just follow the same. Anything you want to response or supplementary? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the attendees. It's a great pleasure to be here today to share my thoughts and to learn all the thoughts of others. Very interesting discussions. And I particularly appreciate the questions raised by the panelists. Well, I mean, the COVID-19, I agree, it's largely gone, but the impacts are still there. So it's a ripple effect. And you can see by, what happens in the US as the largest consumer in the world. I mean, the injection of the cash in the market, now, the market's gone and inflation, everything. And I assume this will continue for some time. And you can see the fluctuations in the market. And that is all, I mean, the market is responding to the impact of the COVID, including logistics, including shipments, and including recovering from the supply chains. That's quite a long-term battle, I think so. Mm-hmm. And in terms of supply chain efficiency and resilience, I mean, those two, that's basically the research I'm doing for quite a while. I mean, the reality is, if you want to increase your efficiency, you have to compromise on the resilience, because efficiency means, well, you have the shortest and the minimum and just-in-time supplies, and that kind of very tight efficiency-driven design will be compromised if anything. I mean, doesn't matter if natural disasters or war or pandemic will make the supply chain break. And the problem is we have to, because Antonio and I think quite a few others mentioned the global value chain, value-added global value chain. That is actually a very simplified model. That is, well, we put all the countries along this production spectrum, divided by their contribution in value adding in the process. But the problem is, many of the small suppliers in the supply chain, they are never shown on the global value chain. They control very tiny bit of the supply, and they're not showing on the global value chain. But if they are attacked, the whole supply chain will collapse. So that's the reality. So how to manage the balance between efficiency and resilience is a big challenge that is actually not just for green energy transitions, is also for the whole industry spectrums. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Myrna. Probably Anthony. Yeah.
Thank you again. And again, a great forum and a great discussion happening. From my perspective, I think I come back to the way the internet is developed with its resilience around the TCP/IP network infrastructure. So if there's a problem somewhere, there's a route, a workaround. That came about due to standards, a layer, taxonomy around the design and then the infrastructure, and that drove a whole economy around that. Then we had so internet, telco, mobile phones. Yeah, we've lived through the coal and the oil era, and now we're entering this this new era of this clean energy, this green economy era, and we haven't yet worked out the rules around that. And the reality is human nature. We are still ignoring the fact that we are all under a more extreme threat from nature responding to our impact on its balance than we are from geopolitical ideology. And so until we as a race have a shared sort of commitment and focus, I think we'll still be dealing in regional defense mechanisms. That said, the economics is actually quite simple. Even when we were just working on a startup within the hydrogen sector in the last 18 months, the real challenge is capital. Capital drives the acceleration of innovation, but the reality is if you don't have a customer and a guarantee of demand, you're not going to get access to the capital. And the capital is required, particularly in these large infrastructure issues. And so the challenges are going to be around commitment. So at the moment, Australia's flourished on the back of takeoff agreements for our gas and commitments on our iron ore. And so that's allowed capital to come in and fund the growth of an industry. And then what we are now looking at is a desire to do the same thing around renewable energy. Where does most of the equipment for renewable energy come from? China. How does that happen? Because they developed a very efficient way of consolidating their industrial base and their supply chain to actually solve the demand problem. China itself has its own scale that is very hard for other markets to compete. The US cannot compete with scale of domestic market in China. And as was mentioned just before, China knows it needs to double down on all of its renewable generation capacity just to meet its own peak carbon and net zero 2060 requirements. The opportunity for China is to take its knowledge in how to build factories fast and to improve efficiencies in supply chains into global markets. And if that is impeded through geopolitical issues, that is actually a negative outcome for humanity. And so I see huge economic opportunities for Australia, for Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Africa, Europe, simply because of the scale of the challenge. What we haven't worked out is a shared drive for achieving a mutually beneficial outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Ravenna, do you have some immediate response?
Yes, actually, I do think like this topic and this kind of event quite meaningful, especially like all the person who I saw all the attendings is the person who kind of leading this industry and leading this relationship become more warm and become better, which is as I sharing in previously. I believe like ISETS actually is one of the things can enhance this collaboration. And then at the same time, like I do believe like Australia neighborhood, South Asia, China neighborhood, South Asia can be the bridge. And I do believe for the past statistic we say before 2019, the China and Australia have so many investment, so many collaboration, which is I believe if we do now, we do better now, we can have more collaboration in technology, which is the technology can help the whole country and the whole human society, which is going faster and going better. yeah, so I'm happy to discuss more details with all the attending, and I'm happy to receive all the topic I want to sharing and topic I want to discuss further with all the attending today. Yeah, very thank you for Dr. Shi to provide me this platform to sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Ravina. And for our participant, if you have any questions, you either turn on your video and audio and ask, or you raise hand, or you put in chat box. Either way is fine. We have 80 minutes to go. Feel free to post any questions. So I probably hold for a little bit to see whether anyone want to raise any question. I didn't see the hand raising, so I probably leave my two fellows in the rooms to see whether you have any further question and comments.
So just talking about the whole supply chain spectrum and the supply chain resilience issue. So I'm also thinking about that. I think we need to diversify. I mean, talking about the China or ASEAN country. So China basically is as a buyer of the raw materials on the supply chain, and Australia may be a seller. So I think we should also no matter be the seller or be the buyer, we need to kind of diversify from the seller point of view, we need to diversify the buyers, or from the buyer's perspective, we need to diversify the sellers alongside the whole supply chain. I think this may also be the way, like Mui just mentioned, this is the way to strengthen the resilience alongside the supply chain. So yeah, I'm also because our presenters, our speakers are the experts on this issue. So I'm also I would also like to seek the opinions from the speakers and my colleague.
Okay, so may sound a bit too academic, but I have a question for Professor Maria. Because I got the feeling that from one of your figures in your presentation slides, it seems that China is dominating the critical mineral supply chain, especially the demand side. So that probably means give me the impression that domination is a resilience problem. But then you also explain that this whole global supply chain is made up of a large number of stakeholders or players, and any players fail, that means that the resilience of the whole supply chain, the whole system may fail or got affected. That means that probably domination or more consolidation may be the solution to improve the resilience. So there may be a bit contradictions. That's why I want to ask for your opinion.
Yeah.
Great question.
Domination versus diversification.
Yes, I don't know whether domination is the problem or the solution.
Yeah, let me explain to you. Let's just put it this way. If we judge a supply chain's vulnerability, and we actually put political factors in it, you think about this way: if without geopolitical tensions, this supply chain is actually very resilient, despite the fact that China controls the whole bulk of the processing and production in the critical minerals. The reason is, as I explained, China's market is big enough, and China has very diverse and redundant supply networks and the surface. That's what I said, the ecosystem. So if you look at it from the supply perspective, even without country-wise diversity, the supply chain is still quite resilient. But it's not until China is cut off from the global supply chain, and that is quite possible. So that is what the West-led allies are doing. The reason is, Anthony just talked about standards. That's a very good point, because if you control 80% of the production, you control the production standards. By de facto, those Chinese standards will become global and industry standards. And that is what worries the US and EU most. So they must restart a new supply chain. reestablish their own standards despite the costs in financial terms, in environmental terms. As I said, that's not going to be sustainable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the question is that dominance, when you answer whether dominance probably depends on who's dominant, particularly whether it's China's dominant. That's probably something. I think before the other speakers respond, I just raised one issue so we can respond together. This is a question from Muyati. She asks that what is the constraint in some country to adopt or build renewable energy? I think I understand late comer, and how to make it faster, and whether that kind of catch up is relevant to supply chain. I'm open to all the speakers, whoever want to pick up the question or make a final remarks. To Anthony's.
Yeah, I'm twitchy on this at the moment. Look, when everyone's looking at security, all of that security has been driven by energy. All of the US interest and attention in activity in the Middle East was all around energy security, and all of the activity in the South China Sea was around transport access and security. And so all of this has not really gone into the background, but what people aren't recognizing is that insecurity is driving the adversarial activities. And so over the top of all of this, we keep saying remove geopolitics out of it. That is the fundamental barrier. Australia used to have a automotive manufacturing industry. We do not produce any of our own motor vehicles anymore. So at a starting point, Australia has to make a commitment that we want an EV manufacturing industry in Australia, because with that, it drives a battery industry. With the battery industry, you drive the anode and the cathode manufacturing for the cells, which then has a customer base for the inputs and the raw materials, all of which requires capital and technological capability. And right now, we're avoiding both of those things coming from China because of a desire to sell our raw materials to the US. So the US builds up its car manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, even the EU at the moment is recognizing that the game may have slipped already, because 20% of their China's exports of EVs is going to Europe. And so the dominance in supply chains and this resilience as a result of that is simply a result of that is where the demand is. And so any country, and it was the comment just before, is that Marina said that the costs around environmental impact and the economics, the reality is it's going to be very difficult to achieve cost efficiencies to compare with the supply chain efficiencies that have been built up in 10 years in China, unless you reach out to China and say, like Indonesia say, we want you to build a factory here, and then we will build up our industry around that. Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, all going to be doing that. Australia, in that case, has just lost 500 million customers for our EVs because we're not acting. So Australia's challenge is strategic beyond the Five Eyes relationship. It's strategic from the prosperity of our nation in a region that is going to move past us very quickly.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Anthony, I think you answered the questions I didn't finish earlier. So that is exactly, if China diverts its sourcing of the minerals or even building processing productions in East Asian countries, that is diversification. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Agree.
Yeah, I think there was one last question from Raymond Cole. He asked that how to manage the security. I think before that is answered from business and academic whether there is a security issue and how to manage it. And Marina just mentioned that invest in ASEAN will be one solution. Any additional ways to manage the security if there is a security challenges? Probably as a concluding a statement from the panelists and the speaker, each probably 30 seconds, or if you have, say, what do you think is the most important things to manage security? Yeah. So nobody, yeah, Mui, please.
My personal view is that isolation won't make ourselves more secure. And we need more interaction. If we are all dependent on each other somehow, then we create a huge system where everyone depends on everyone. Then we are more secure. Because everyone is committed to this whole system, and we need to make sure that it is functioning.
And this is the resilience of nature and biodiversity. So we have to learn from nature. So Raymond's question around security and the threat of adversary is, I think the common sense of ASEAN in the ability to be pragmatic in the balancing of economic interests with differing interests is the lesson that the West has to learn. Is how do we balance ideology with economics? And I think, as Marina just mentioned, that diversification, distributed manufacturing and supply chain resilience within regions will then build up the economic confidence for us to work together. And China is going to double the amount of people that have moved into middle income in the last 20 years. It's caused all of this change in the dynamics of the economics. There's another that population again to happen in the next 20 years. So there's no shortage of increasing economic strength of China. What China recognizes is that this is a global challenge that is they have to change, we have to change our economic foundations. And I think there's a desire there to share and to accelerate this change around the world. So geothermal is a very, I just noticed that in the questions, a very potential energy supply, but the challenge is its generation and its use has to be close to the, its source has to be close to the use. And there was a couple of efforts in Australia around geothermal. Certainly Iceland is, I think, 100% renewable on geothermal. It's the same challenge around the conversion efficiencies of the generation and the distribution for it to be taken up as a proportion of the renewables generation.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, thanks, Anthony. I think in the interest of time, probably I'm not open for any further comments, but I think one of the issues we discussed and the possible answer is that we need engagement for supply security and mutual dependency, or close engagement rather than isolation. Kick one guy out of, or wouldn't help us, wouldn't benefit our environment, probably regional economy, and also probably it's impossible. And also, when we look at the supply security, we need to look at it from systematic view or perspective, rather than just look at one particular issue, say, oh, I'm dependent on that guy, but actually that guy also depends on me on something else. So I think the overall is still be a close interaction or more integrated world, more secure, yes, rather than a fragmented and isolated world. But I think the problem for academia and B is more probably is here we share the view, but I noticed that we don't have a politician here, particularly for a particular country who advocated this security issue, what do they think and the response to this issue. I think that will be something hopefully in our future dialogue, we manage to get some of these people to have a conversation about the way forward. I see the last question from Mariaki about how to get a recording. We will upload on the ISETS YouTube. If you look at Anthony's background on the top right hand, we have yeah, thank you. We have the ISETS website and also YouTube and all various things. And I just want to highlight that ISETS we created for free flow of information to whoever needed rather than who can pay it. So essentially, we created all the members by default will be free permanently. That's different from any other club. We want to share the knowledge. So feel free to subscribe to receive all the information and update. I think with this, I will conclude this session, and I want to thank all our speakers, my fellow panelists, and all the panelists. And I'm looking forward to see you personally, not very long, and hopefully we also have a continuous engagement or the debate in ISETS platform or other platform, and particularly with people who have a different view. We hopefully can advocate our energy transition with affordable, available to all those who need it, and to achieve our much needed carbon neutrality by the middle of century. Thank you all very much. See you all in the other occasion. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.